Hello. I do wonder, at times, as I'm sure a lot of people do, at the way that our society appears to have destroyed itself almost without noticing over a long period of time now, really. Of course, some people did notice, but they were always discredited. And now, as more and more people are noticing, the discrediting seems to be becoming more and more desperate and hysterical, you know. But there is an underlying philosophy, clearly, to the kind of self destruction that our society and our culture seems to have been going through. Yeah, like a lot of people, I probably see it as having its origins in around about the time of the 1960s, though you could also say sort of like since the post-war era as well, just the post-war era. And it does come from a certain kind of recension of liberal philosophy, in a sense, or liberal sentiment, which views all human beings as universal and as pretty much interchangeable. Yeah. It's also quite leftist in that it's leftism, as I experienced it, always had this thing of wanting to say that everything was nurture rather than nature, for instance. Everything was social pressures and conditionings rather than, say, inequalities in people. And so, nature becomes the enemy of this philosophy. It becomes suspect. And I think that explains the inherent paranoia of a lot of leftism and increasingly of a lot of sort of like liberalism. Because if nature is the enemy, then the enemy is everywhere and it's in yourself as well. So I think that is something. There are all sorts of misunderstandings I see occurring, though, stemming from this. Another thing is individual versus society or community or people or tribe or however you want to put it. Yeah, but it's very much the individual. Yeah. And it's as if the individual is the only thing. Now, I think the individual is extremely important, and I very much like the idea of individual rights and stuff like that. Yeah, and being able to live an individual life, and that individualism is, I think, very important. However, that doesn't mean that other things don't always also exist. It doesn't mean that collectives don't have characteristics, and they're not the same as the characteristics of individuals. Yeah. So we have all these things where we will say, you know, a certain group will behave in a certain way statistically. Yeah. And but you can't actually name that or analyze it, because if you do so, it's as if you're told that you're saying that the individual doesn't exist and that everyone is exactly that. That's not how it works. People people work differently in masses to the way they do as individuals. Yeah. And the fact is, no matter how much our ruling philosophy wants to imagine that we are all interchangeable individuals, yeah, the fact is, people don't behave that way. In groups, in masses specifically, they behave differently. Yeah. And it's funny because as soon as you talk about, say, a football crowd, everyone says, "Oh yeah, we see it." But talk about like a homogenous group of migrants, and you cannot see that at all. Yeah. So we have this very bizarre way of looking at things. Yeah. And apart from that as well, there is this whole way of seeing minorities. Yeah. Yeah. This whole way of seeing minorities. And this in part is come from this sort of like this transmutation of human rights law from the post-war era, where it was, as I understood it, about defending populations from their governments, in other words, defending the majority of people from the government. It's been transmuted into an obsession with protecting minorities from the majority, which of course can only be done through the power of the state or a kind of state-like power. Um, uh, that also, I think, comes with this whole thing of international law, because, well, what's the basis of international law? According to who? Who, who, who comes up with international law? It has to. It's not something which has been able to evolve organically in any way. Um, it's something which it's just come out of the heads of specific bunches of people. Yeah, and the basis of international law is a whole subject in itself, really. Um, but the whole thing with minorities is that minorities of one sort or another are outliers. Yeah, within a society, and we have to look at societies. There is no humanity in the abstract. We have to look at societies, which means looking at localities, which means looking at countries and peoples. Something like democracy could not exist as we understand it. Yeah, this sort of idea of a liberal democracy could not exist as we understand it without a nation state. It's just how it is. Yeah. Um, but we have this whole thing about, like, this obsession with minorities, but minorities are outliers, and the society as a whole, which is a real thing, because it's not just interchangeable individuals. The society as a whole depends upon the mid-range. It depends upon the middle of the bell curve. It does not depend upon the outliers. The outliers can be very valuable. They can be very positive. Yeah, they can also be very negative. But the thing is, the outliers can be positive, can be a necessary thing in the right measure. Yeah, but you depend upon the mid-range. You depend upon the majority. Yeah. Even as a minority, and I belong to a minority as a homosexual man, the minorities depend upon the majority. The minorities depend upon the kindness, the acceptance, and the compassion of the majority. Yeah. But when you kind of disregard the reality of society and the reality of how people behave in groups, and it is just a matter of individuals, interchangeable individuals, you eliminate all of these aspects of human nature. They become they become ideologically invisible, which is going to give you a very odd sense of things, because they are right in your face all the time. Yeah. But they can't be named, and in fact they have to be denied and suppressed, and the recognition of them has to be increasingly punished, it seems. But anyway, I don't have a sort of like a proper conclusion to this video, really. But you can see there are various strands and streams which have led through what is the progressive destruction of our society and our culture, I think. Yeah. And there are various stages to it which you could trace out, starting, I think, largely in the post-war era, and moving up till now, accelerating dreadfully from 1997 under Tony Blair. But there are a number of things, and they deal with a philosophy, a liberal philosophy, which is quite unrealistic, and which treats all people as interchangeable individuals, basically. Does not recognize the behavior of peoples in groups. And it's funny, a philosopher which is increasingly so obsessed with social justice, supposedly social justice, which is, of course, a complete mess in terms of our development of the idea of justice. Justice is meant to be blind. It's it's equality before the law. Well, social justice cannot be equality before the law. It's inequality before the law. So you can see we have a problem there. But in any case, with these this sort of like modern philosophy, which is so obsessed with things like social justice, and yet it itself seems to have to deny the reality of society itself. So I think we have a lot of things there which clearly lead to incoherence. And because they have power, and increasingly have had more and more power, the results are more and more disastrous. And that's how I see it. Now, just a postscript to my video, because I think a lot of these things are so often kind of presented or interpreted or force interpreted in a very kind of cliched way, which is because of the dominant paradigm, essentially, which is part of the problem. I hope it's kind of like clear from what I've said that my concern is that society needs to be able to exist and grow and live organically, and you cannot simply disregard the organic characteristics of a society and overrule them with a kind of abstracted liberal philosophy and expect this to still work. An example of this, obviously, I think, is because it's very much in the news, and it's in the news for good reasons. The phenomenon of mass migration and mass settlement, yeah. And people will say, "Oh, but we're a country built on migration. We're a country of immigrants, and we're a country, and like, oh, but you must have movement. You can't just be sort of like shut up." None of those things are relevant to the question. In fact, everyone knows that societies constantly change and grow and go through organic processes of growth. Everyone knows that. It's nothing controversial as an idea, yeah. But what that means is that societies have to be able to absorb change and integrate it in order to be able to grow. That's if you value the society itself. Now, if you don't value the society and you simply wish to destroy it, of course, that's a different matter. But if you wish a society to be able to thrive and grow, you have to be able to integrate and absorb whatever changes it meets. Yeah. And the question of integration of migration is a big one because, again, people are not simply interchangeable abstracted individuals or a kind of abstracted humanity. Yeah. And when you have large masses of people arriving in a society, the question is, one, do they want to integrate? Two, do they have the time to integrate? Yeah, in other words, you get a discrete amount of people arrive, then the influx is done, they then have time to potentially integrate, providing there is a will to integrate. Yeah. And that will happen, hopefully, over time. Yeah. I always give the example of my own father, who came here from Yugoslavia in the post-war years, in the immediate post-war years. My father married an English woman, settled here, and brought us up as English, basically. We didn't learn Serbo-Croat. We learned English. We spoke English at home, and growing up in this culture, of course, there will be certain variations in us because our father has his characteristics, and we inherit some of those characteristics, yeah, and so they are part of us. But we grew up as English, and our father always told us. Basically, that's what you are. That's basically why he came here. He didn't come here to recreate his home country in another country. He came here to be part of this country. And that's a very, very big difference between somebody like that and somebody, or a whole enormous amount of people who come to this country and have no intention of becoming part of it, but rather want to maintain their old ways of life here. Now, it's not to say that, there has to be some sort of uniformity. As I said, things grow. There's an organic process which takes place. And that organic process has to be respected if you respect the society itself. The responsibility for this lies with the people who run our country and have run it, the people who rule it, essentially. That's where the responsibility lies. It lies with them. And so that's just something I wanted to make clear. And also that the society I want to see maintained and the society that I want to see preserved is a liberal society. It's a tolerant society. It's a society which has certain attitudes towards women and their rights, has certain attitudes towards people being able to have same-sex relationships and not be persecuted, has certain attitudes towards religious diversity. Yeah, people having the freedom to leave a religion if they want to, people having the freedom to choose their religion once they're adults. These are all things which, I'd like to see preserved. These are not things which are common throughout the entire world. Yeah, and these are not things which will survive unless you protect them. And that is my concern. I don't want to grow up. Oh, well, I've grown up. I don't want to live in a country where we lose these things. And I don't want succeeding generations to live in a country where these things have been lost. And so I think these things are very, very important. And this is why I make this video about progressive social destruction, because it's happened. And I would hope that it would stop and it will be reversed, and that we will have a real looking for solutions. But in order to look for solutions to these things, we actually have to acknowledge the problems. And that's something which, at present, under the ruling liberal philosophy, actually cannot be done because it's heretical. So that's pretty much what I've got to say about on this. I hope the videos have been clear, and I hope it's clear that what I want to see protected is a liberal society, a liberal democratic society, which has been able to grow over hundreds of years. I don't want to see that destroyed. And I think it could be, and we have to be aware of that. It doesn't have to be something which we are hysterical about. We have to always remain positive, but at the same time, we have to be pretty clear-sighted. If you live within a garden, that garden only exists because it has a wall around it, yeah, and because it's maintained. It doesn't just exist as a free gift which will go on forever. And I think that's what I really want to say.